Howdy folks, and welcome to another Taste of Gameplay video, this time for the Italian Tier 2 tech tree destroyer, the Curtatone. Had to look up how to pronounce that. I hope I got it right. Apologies if I offend any Italian listeners. As always, these videos are designed to give you a sample of the gameplay of the ship, not to be an exhaustive analysis. I recommend the Wargaming Wiki or other content creators. So, I really like doing these videos because I get introduced to ships that I never even heard of or thought about, much less played, and that's definitely the case here. The Curtatone is really interesting because it's a Tier 2 destroyer, but it only has sap. Of course, it has torpedoes as well. It's got an exhaust smoke, full speed smoke. It has a speed boost, so it's basically like a little mini Tier 2 Paolo Emilio, which is fun because, of course, that's the name of this channel, and I love the Paolo Emilio. So, is the Curtatone good? Well, I mean, of course, you have to remember that Tier 2 these days is a very different beast. You're mostly playing against bots. It winds up being a matter of DPM and like volume of damage you can do. So the V25 is always going to have this thing beat because the torpedoes reload really fast and you can sail around the map super speedy. You don't even use your guns, you just use torpedoes to sink everything on the enemy team, just like that. So no, the Curtatone is not going to be nearly as good as that, but it is fun, and I can see why they put it in the game. You know, one of the things that Wargaming used to use these lower tiers for, and they still do to some extent, is to teach you things about the game. And obviously, the Curtatone is here to teach us about SAP. So let's learn about SAP. Interesting thing about the Curtatone, because I looked this up, it used to have HE and SAP. Please ignore my running directly into this bot clumsily. It used to have HE and SAP, and they changed it so it only has SAP because I think they want beginners and players that are new to the game to really use the SAP. So let's talk about SAP. SAP is the third ammo type in the game, by far the most recent one. It was introduced a few years ago. And the way it works is definitely kind of confusing. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain it entirely in the 5 minutes left in this video, but here's the gist of it. So when you fire AP, a complicated set of equations runs to calculate a final value, which is called the penetration value, and it has to do with how fast the shells are going, how far they've traveled, the weight of the shells, some secret numbers that you can look up, various other things. And then you get this penetration number that gets compared to the different layers of armor as the shell travels through the enemy ship, and various things can happen, including shatters, overpens, penetrations, or of course the citadels. And it all has to do with the way the shell strikes the armor and the angle of the shell. And there's a whole series of videos that Wargaming has where you can look all this up. Conversely, HE shells, high explosive shells, are very simple. They have a penetration rating in millimeters. Let's say it's 30 millimeters. And that penetration rating is compared to the first layer of armor that the shell hits. Just the first layer. The other layers do not matter at all. And if that penetration value is smaller than the armor, then it shatters. And if it's bigger than the armor, then it does damage. There's no such thing as an overpenetration. I don't believe there's even such a thing as a ricochet. It's really just that simple, and then the shell explodes, and there's some complex calculations that happen involving doing damage to different parts of the ship that I don't have time to go into, and then there's also a chance of the enemy ship catching fire from the HE shell. SAP is a combination of both of these ideas. So first of all, SAP shells cannot set enemy ships on fire, and like HE, SAP shells have a fixed penetration value. It's typically a good bit higher than the HE shell would be, maybe as much as double the penetration value, but it's still a fixed value. And the same thing happens with that first layer of armor. You compare that penetration value to that first layer, and if it's smaller, then the SAP shell is not going to do anything. So you see that just happen. I got non-penetrations because I hit the center of this enemy ship. which is a Mikasa, which is a battleship, which has pretty good armor. But you see now I'm hitting the stern of the ship and I'm getting full penetrations. So much like HE, sap shells cannot overpen. They can only pen or shatter, basically. Non-penetrations or penetrations. They can ricochet, unlike HE shells. However, the angles for the ricochet are very, very tight. I believe it's 15 degrees at most. So only at a ricochet angle of 15 degrees or less do you have a chance of that sap ricocheting. So what does this, boil all this down, what does it mean? It means that sap shells are actually kind of in some ways the opposite of AP shells. They tend to be incredibly good against lightly armored targets. They do full damage against things like destroyers, like cruisers, anywhere where you're not getting any kind of serious armor. But they do no damage to heavily armored parts of ships that have armor, like the centers of cruisers or most of the parts of a battleship other than the superstructure. And they don't set fires. So they can be incredibly, also I should mention, much like HE, it's very, very hard. It's not actually impossible for reasons I won't get into, but it's very hard to get a citadel. So most of the time with sap shells, you're getting one of two options. The shell does damage or the shell doesn't do damage. If the shell does damage, it's going to be pretty good. Typically on most ships, the sap is, in terms of the alpha value, the alpha damage, it's between the HE and the AP. That's not always true, so you have to look at the ship. But in general, you can expect it to be somewhere in between. So sap can be incredibly powerful, especially if you know how to use it. Some of the high tier sap equipped battleships and cruisers are insane. If you want to learn how to use sap, I actually think the Curtatone could be a good ship to just practice with bots on, just tier 2 games. It's a fun, nimble ship. The guns are pretty good. It's not as good as the V25, but it's fun to play. Anyway, that's sap. That's the Curtatone, and I will see you in the next one.